G'day, welcome to the Financial Bloke Podcast, the podcast for people seeking the wisdom needed to grow their family's wealth and live a happier, healthier and more prosperous life. My name's Ben Law and I am the Financial Bloke. Most parents want their kids to learn how to be good with money because they instinctively know that a failure to learn how to play the game of money will put their kids at a major disadvantage, making their lives so much harder. But whilst the majority of parents want to help their kids, most just don't know how the hell to go about it. Because this is such a hot topic with most parents, I decided I'd try a 3-part series on kids and money, which I've called Money Muscles. In episode 1, I'll be joined by Tim Rivett. Tim and I will be drawing on our almost 40 years of combined professional experience to discuss why you should be educating your kids about money. In the second episode, Tim and I will share the money ideas and philosophies that we're using to teach our nieces and nephews, as well as our daughters who are all under the age of 12. And finally, in the third episode, I'll be discussing with Carmen Quaid, who's a farmer, an educator, and the mother of 5 kids, how to prepare teenagers and adult children. This is a new format and I'd welcome any feedback and questions. If you love the concept, let us know and we might just do some more. So without further delay, let's get cracking with episode number 1.
I've got a 6-year-old daughter, or a daughter that turns 6 tomorrow, and I've also got a bunch of nieces and nephews who are 10, 12, 14 and 16 who I'm actively involved in trying to pass on some money knowledge, I suppose I should say. So I'd just like to say welcome, Tim. And I think it's a topic that you're interested in strongly as well, aren't you?
Yeah, great to be here, Ben. And I'm very passionate about this. I'm in a similar situation to you. I have an almost 4-year-old of my own, a little girl, and nieces and nephews who I'm also involved in and trying to teach them about money, which, as we know, is not at all taught in traditional curriculum. So, yeah, some real life examples for us to learn from.
I think so. And the reality is you're a lawyer by trade. I was a financial advisor by trade, but we've both spent many years thinking and learning about money itself outside of our profession. So I think it's very fair to say that we're newish parents and we don't have 5 or 6 kids that we can, cut our teeth on to learn all these things. So we're not going to have all the answers. And I think that's something that became very clear in our discussions, wasn't it? That we want these episodes to be about a journey, sharing ideas. And a lot of people may disagree with us and we'd love to hear why and get other people's input. So I think that's a fair point. You've spent a lot of years, talking about money, learning about money yourself.
Yeah, very much so, Ben, both professionally and as a personal interest. I've always had a huge personal interest in personal finance, and that was thrust upon me, I suppose, by my mum, a background in accounting. So she was always very disciplined with teaching us about budgeting, and we'd sit around the kitchen table and she'd teach us about profit and loss statements and the difference between a budget and an actual and a balance sheet versus a profit and loss. We thought it was terribly boring when we were teenagers, but it was a great background. But now that I've got a real life example, I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to do with this 4-year-old? Do I, we'll get into it in a minute, but do I wait, let her have a childhood, teach her when she's 20? By then it's probably too late, all those types of things. But yeah, I'm nervous to do this, Ben, because I'm a pretty experienced lawyer now, so I know my day job really well, and I love helping people in areas that I feel very comfortable advising on. But I really am a fish out of water here, and that's a very uncomfortable position for me to be in, to share the fact that I don't have all the answers to this. I've got some ideas and I've asked around, but I really would welcome that feedback and that disagreement from people, or people who have better ideas than what we're working on.
And it's interesting, Tim, because my wife, she's an engineer, so she's very much a numbers and figures person. And being a financial advisor, I was the same. And we quite often disagree on how we're doing this with our daughter, how we're teaching her about money and wealth and business, etc. We quite often not have sparring matches, but we intellectually disagree and have different ideas about how we do it. And there's a lot of give and take. And I can say she's been wrong, I've been wrong, and we're on a journey to try and work it out. And we're definitely not smug, know-it-all sort of blokes. We want to learn as much as we can and also share, because I think professionally you've spent probably 15, almost 20 years as a lawyer dealing with families and disagreements over money and people that have inherited a lot of money and lost it all. So I think there's a lot we can share. And as an advisor, I had the same. So I suppose, Tim, where I'd like to start is, what are the problems that parents are facing today with kids and money? What's your experience? And again, you've got a lot of mates that have got children as well that you talk regularly about this. So what are you finding out there, the major problems people have?
Yeah, so Ben, I've done an audit on the older millennial form of communication, which is the group chat. Nowadays, we obviously listen to podcasts and emails and things, but a lot of my friends are based overseas, so we have this giant group chat of university mates or schoolmates or whatever. And so you can get 10 or 12 different positions and opinions in a safe space. We're very comfortable bearing it all in those. So I've got some ideas and some real life examples. Some of the friends of mine have slightly older children than maybe you and I do, Ben, so they're a bit further down that journey. But a lot of the objections seem to rest upon, do you let your kids have a childhood and not expose them to the responsibilities that are associated with things like money, and start the financial education when they're 13, 14, 15, something like that? Or do you start them young so that it's a lifelong learning experience and you instill those lifelong habits? So that's where the disagreement seems to be, based on the old analogy that, I'm going to stuff this up, Ben, but show me a child of 7 and I will show you the adult, or something along those lines. The 7-Up series, which has been a fascinating psychology exercise. The theory is that kids learn a lot of their habits and a lot of their moral fibre by the time they're 7. So you sort of think, if I wait until they're older, have I missed the boat? But I always feel a little bit nervous, I suppose, about trying to drill into my 4-year-old how to be responsible with money and how to save and do all those kinds of things, because it's insanely early to be trying to teach a concept like that when she's not tying her shoes yet and doing all those types of things. But the example that I like to use, Ben, is the absurdity of the way in which we spend money nowadays. I'm not talking about frivolity. I'm talking about the mechanics of it. When we were kids, we had cash, right? And I at some stage as a kid knew what cash was, and I knew that there were coins and I knew that there were notes. My little girl thinks that mummy and daddy's watches are the bank.
Well, it used to be credit cards.
It used to be. Well, it was credit cards at a time, but we're Steve Jobs converts and we have Apple watches, and I don't carry a wallet anymore. I probably couldn't tell you where it is. I should find it actually, because it's got my license in it, but I don't carry it anymore, Ben. So my little girl's old enough now that we buy things together. We go out for lunch. She loves to go up to the counter and pay and, speak to people and smile at people and say thank you, that type of thing. She's going to be exposed to a totally different world of mechanical expenditure, which is this magic that you pay for things using your watch. So at some point, we need to teach her that your watch is connected to a payment processing system and a bank account, and you have to work to put money in your bank account, or you have to have income to put money in your bank account. So I think the game has changed. Everyone who's my age is, of course, going to say that because it's different, and back in my day, we did things differently. But I'm sitting here thinking, if I don't teach my little girl things, she's just going to ask for a magical watch one day and just assume that if she has that watch, she can buy whatever she likes, because that's what mum and dad seem to do. So that's where I'm coming from, Ben, that I need some ideas and I want to exchange ideas about at what age do we start that financial education, and when we decide to start it, what do we do around that? And that's what we're going to explore today.
Excellent. And look, I totally concur, because it's a much, much more complex world in many ways than any generation before has had. And, growing up in a household, I grew up where we didn't do anything with balance sheets or any accounting work or anything like that, because my parents weren't doing those things. My uncle used to do the accounting work on the farm, but my parents taught me how to work hard and save. And there was a lot missing. They gave me a good start. And I think it's really important to remember that the earlier you start, the more it will impact their blueprint. Because I think kids get a blueprint from a young age on not only their knowledge and experience, but the way they view money, the way they see it. And I think there's a couple of objections that I find from people, and I call it the 3 no's. And the first one is I don't know anything about this, and so I'm stuck. Then there's I don't want to know. People that want to put their heads in the sand and say it's all too hard, and I get that. And the next one is I don't know where to start. How do I start? How do I get this journey with my kids started? And I think most people fall into that category. And I probably know more than most people about money, being a financial advisor for 20 years and also learning about it. But it's that, how do I actually start with my child and make it age appropriate? And I have to say, I've audited with my family and tried to get an idea of what the objections are, and many, many friends over the years. And yeah, the old let kids be kids, like age appropriate. And I think that's really important. And, a lot of people also say that kids are too young to understand, but I disagree with that. You can start really young and just interject some basic money language, shall I say. And, there are some really key points about, not wanting kids to worry about money or get a negative association. And I love to tell the story about when I was about 8, when interest rates are about 20%. And I clearly remember it. It's a strong memory. And we lost a wheat crop to hail. And I remember going to Woolworths with a calculator with Mum. We used to go to town once a month and asking, why have we got this calculator? Can't the checkout lady do that? And saying, well, we don't know if we've got enough money to buy food. And it was the first time in my life I understood the concept of money and why it was important. And so we have to be careful when we're dealing with kids that we do it age appropriate. And I think the final ones is people just don't know what to teach kids. How do I teach them? Like, it's okay to talk about money, but what if I do the wrong thing? I think they're really important objections, and they're real. I totally believe they're all real, they're all valid, and we've just got to find ways to get around that.
You're so right, Ben. I mean, are they too young? When do we start? That's something that I've been really wrestling with. But as I said, my little girl's nearly 4, and some of the stuff that she comes out with now makes me realise that her comprehension is way beyond what I thought it was. I was just thinking that her life is mum, dad, family, dogs, friends, that sort of thing. But she gets things, and kids are so much smarter than perhaps we give them credit for. So that's a double-edged sword. They're probably not too young to start understanding some of those concepts, but they're also old enough to be damaged if we do the wrong thing by them. And there's a paranoia around that, maybe that our well-intentioned efforts are actually doing more harm than good.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Tim, if I could just interject with a little example there. I was talking to someone recently, and they had a client who was extremely wealthy, was on one of the top 200 richest families in Australia. And dad and mum had worked extremely hard, were very down to earth, were very caring, giving people, but the children turned out to be pretty screwed up when it came to money. And when they dug into it, dad passed away, and it was because dad was so tight with their money and so didn't want them to be entitled. And so these were just little silly examples we might laugh at, but he would send them off to boarding school and give them no money. So when they went places, their friends would have money because of the circles they're in, and they wouldn't have the money. They get teased. And so they ended up with this real negative association with money. So there was plenty of money. There was an education about money, but it was done the wrong way in hindsight. And, it's very easy to look back in hindsight and potentially criticize someone, but that's just some of the problems that can actually happen. So where I want to go on to now, Tim, is I've got some really strong reasons. I think we should be educating our kids about money. I really do. I think it's one of the key cornerstones of, I suppose you'd say, raising well-rounded, independent children. And the number one reason for me is that I don't want my kid and don't want my nieces and nephews getting their money education or their values from the media or the entertainment industries or the big banks. I think I wrote down on my notes when I was thinking about this, no bloody way. And that's the major reason I think we should, is if we don't, someone else is doing it. And if anyone's looked at social media, Instagram, the stories in the media that you see coming out, it's a terrible blueprint to be putting on our kids. Would you agree?
I totally agree, Ben. And we no longer can control that as parents either, because the access to information and the ability to go find it yourself is like it's never been before. And I don't want to speak like a dinosaur, but I didn't have the internet until I was 10 or 12 as a kid. So the financial education that I got was either from my parents or from the Commonwealth Bank, who gave me a Dolomite account, back in the good old days.
Have you still got it?
I do still have it.
So do I.
Yep.
Yeah. It's the greatest marketing ploy ever.
Yep. My wife still has hers, and she will absolutely not let her pay go into any other account than her Dolomite account, which I can't see, which obviously it's not an issue because I've not brought it up in a podcast. But anyway, that's a story for another day.
I won't tell her.
Yeah, thanks. But your kids are exposed to it. So I completely agree with you that if you're not teaching them, someone else will. And if you want to, I shouldn't say control the narrative, but if you want to influence the narrative and influence that education, don't be naive thinking that if you don't do it, it's a certainty that someone else will. And I do get a little bit concerned because I'm a fuddy-duddy like that. So much of the stuff we see on social media is people who don't know better than you do. They are just very good at pushing that message. They're not experts in their field. Most of them are trying to sell something or push some sort of agenda. So if you leave them to their own devices, your kids are going to learn what they learn from those sorts of people or those sorts of platforms. And for me, that's pretty scary.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing also too is, Tim, I look at is the whole losing the wealth. Like there's going to be a massive wealth transfer over the next 20 years. I was reading something, came out of America a little while ago, and it was Americans over age 70. And remember, there's 300 million people in America. There's not the people here, but there was almost $35 trillion in wealth that is held by people age 70 and over in America. So, you divide that back to, say, we've got almost 30 million people, 10%, 3.5 trillion, if that's correct. That's a lot of money that's going to transfer onto the next generation. And we've all heard the, two to make it, one to lose it, or from shirt sleeve to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And there was also in that same research was showing that, most of that wealth, I think it was something like that, 70% of wealth will be lost within 2 generations and 90 within 3. So if we are going to leave some money to our children, if we've got a business or a farm or we're just, going to leave our house when we pass away, most of that's going to be lost. And the sad part is that only 3% of it was attributed to poor professional advice. So lawyers or accountants or financial advisors giving poor advice. Over 60% of it was not preparing your heirs, not preparing the kids. So I think that's a major reason we want to make sure when we do pass on and leave something to our kids that doesn't become a burden, that money, or it just gets frivolly lost, shall I say.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where you and I have some exposure from our professional backgrounds, Ben, that we've helped lots of families with that estate and succession planning and wealth generation. I suppose that's our day job. So we see the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we have the privilege of learning from the mistakes of other people. And I suppose I see that poorly handled intergenerational transfer of wealth because the younger generations haven't had the exposure and the financial education to either understand the wealth, the burden of responsibility that comes with that, how it was created, and perhaps the sacrifices that were made to create it. And it is really true. I mean, it's the Henry Ford example that it takes one to make it and another 2 to lose it. And I've seen that done, and it breaks your heart. It breaks the hearts of the people who made the sacrifices. And so I guess from my perspective, yes, as a professional advisor, I've seen it done well and I've seen it done poorly. But as a father, I don't want it to be done poorly. And I'm really paranoid about missing the boat and leaving it too late. And my daughter not being a well-adjusted person in life and being able to manage her own finances, similar with my nieces and nephews who are a little bit older already.
Yeah. And I think every generation that comes through wants their child or their children to do better than them. That's the drive in most families. And I think material gifts are nowhere near as good as the gift of a good education. And that education is not necessarily what they're getting from a school or university. It's that education around values. It's education around how to be smart about things. And I believe I just want to teach Sophie how to fish. I don't want to give her a fish, and I want to raise her to be self-sufficient and resilient and not reliant on anyone. I think it's really important. Not reliant on parents, not reliant on spouses, and she's then in control of her whole life or her own money and her own life. And I think you see a lot in the media, and I don't know whether this is right or wrong. There's a lot of talk around women and money that, they're worse off than men by the time they retire. They don't necessarily take control of money on average. And so there's this real drive in me to make sure that she gets to be that person that's really smart and intelligent and in control of her money. And also too, Tim, I think it's important to remember that we don't want money to be in control of them either. I mean, you see so many people's lives and stress in their lives because they're worried about money.
Absolutely. And it's a good point that you make, Ben. You and I are in a similar position. We've talked about that in previous estate planning and succession podcasts, that we're both fathers of young girls. And I don't want to enter into the gender debate, but you're right. Historically, women haven't been the decision makers in financial matters. That is definitely changing. And you and I see that in our professional day-to-day as well. But there's the old adage that money is power. It's probably true, but I don't like phrasing it like that. I think money is opportunity. And you're right, I don't want anyone in my family or within my circle of influence to be controlled by money. I want them to control it so that they can live the best life they possibly can, and they can enjoy the opportunities that I believe come from being responsible and not letting money sort of take control of you.
Today's episode is brought to you by AgriCoach. You've worked bloody hard over the years and you've built a solid operation. But as your children grow up and start their own journeys, you're beginning to think about the next 5, 10, and even 15 years and how to keep driving the business forward and ensure a smooth and successful succession plan. Preparing the business, preparing the next generation, and preparing for your eventual retirement all requires a solid plan and a proven process. Unsure about the right steps to take? Head on over to agricoach.com.au/webinar to learn more about our Succession Proof Your Family webinar. AgriCoach, aligning families, growing wealth, and protecting legacies. And now, let's get back to the episode.
Now, Tim, the one thing I struggle with this whole scenario too is that overwhelming desire to protect Sophie from difficulty, hard times, just because I love her and I care about her, and that's the natural instinct of parents or a father. But I'm sure you've seen the fact that, you know, suffering can provide lessons and it can provide resilience. And I think that's one of the things we're going to talk about when we talk about what I'm doing with Sophie, and what we're looking at is letting her make mistakes. And that's really, really tough for me, and knowing that those mistakes are where the best lessons are. And I think parents are really scared about letting their kids make mistakes. We've got to control. And Sarah, my wife, often says to me, you just got to let her make the decisions and make the mistakes and not to try and control everything. So I really struggle with that, because I can see, you know, this is so stupid. Why are we doing this? And Sarah goes, just shut up and let it happen, and don't say I told you so. Just let the lesson sink in. Do you struggle with that with Charlotte?
Yeah, big time. I have this constant push-pull between that. It's probably an instinct, Ben, that we've got the instinct to protect and the desire to, I'd call it the bubble wrap syndrome, that my wife and I are definitely in the helicopter parent category. But there's learning from suffering and learning resilience from suffering as well, like you say, making those mistakes. So you really have to pull that instinct back and keep it in check to allow that to happen. I'm not talking here about safety risks and running on the road without holding your hand, that kind of thing. But I also get frustrated with my little girl because I know she's doing it the wrong way, and I really want to intervene and say, no, this is how you do it. I know better because I've been around longer and I'm your father, you know, the old pull rank parenting style. But it is absolutely true that if you think back through your life, the best lessons we've ever learned were hard made or hard fought. And I want to do that with my daughter, and I want to do that with my niece and nephew. And that's difficult to do, Ben. I do really have that push-pull between, I know rationally that I want them to fail and I want them to make mistakes because it's going to hurt and they're going to remember that pain and it might change their behavior in the future. But we've all got the, I guess, middle-class ability to completely protect our children from the nasty things that they're going to endure in life. But you're not doing them a service in the long run by protecting them too much. And you and I have seen that, Ben. You and I have seen adults in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who absolutely have no idea how to manage finances because they've just never been exposed to it. They've either never had any control or any decision-making power in it, and they just don't have the skills or the experience to understand what they're doing. It makes them vulnerable to either making poor decisions themselves or unfortunately being preyed on by others who do understand what they're doing and take advantage of that naivete.
I totally agree. And something that came up in a conversation with a friend last year, and she's got a Jewish, her family's Jewish, and she lives not too far down the road, got a business. And I didn't realize this. I was naive about it. But and hopefully any Jewish people listening, if I've got this wrong, correct me. But she talked about how in the Jewish faith and in her family, money skills or financial security is part of almost it is part of their religion. You know, one of their teachings is to be financially secure for your family and so you can help others. So the whole tithing mentality. And it was really interesting. She says, it's been drilled into me since I was a kid that you need to be financially secure. You need to be thinking about protecting your family financially and always being able to be resilient with money. And it was amazing, that she lived a great life or lives a great life, has a great business, has a great family, but always on the back of their mind is how can we be smarter with our money? And I think that's one thing that I took away that I'm absolutely trying to, I've put into one of our family values is that whole financial education or financial knowledge, because I think I want to make that a family value. So that whenever we do anything going forward, one of our values to reflect back onto is, well, is this helping us to be smarter with our money, shall we say? Now, Tim, I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you, schools and universities. I mean, you went to a good school. I mean, you went to the same school that my daughter's going to now. You're one of the first students there, and you went to university. Why won't schools or university? Don't they come out of school or university fully educated and knowing about this stuff?
It's a very strange thing, isn't it, Ben? And it's been commentated on in other financial education sources. It's just not part of core curriculum, and it's strange that it's not, and it's sad that it's not. But no, you get no formal financial education in school, primary or secondary, and then unless you have a focus on that at a university level, like you study business or you study accounting and you can kind of understand that. But even that's not talking about personal financial responsibility. And it's very, very strange to me. And as I said, very, very sad to me because parents probably either assume or I'm sure they care, but don't have the skills. And like you said, I don't know, so I don't know how to pass it on. And I want to circle back to that because it's a powerful thing. And the learning together concept is a really important thing to do if you don't have the skills. But you can go through a full set of any education, school, TAFE, learn on the job, that kind of thing. You can be in your mid to late 20s, Ben, and really have no idea about financial education, which is really just setting you up for failure. And that's something I'm very, very aware of. Unfortunately, I've seen it. Unfortunately, you've seen it, Ben. But that early intervention is, in my mind, a really clever way of making sure that doesn't happen if that's a concern for you and your loved ones.
Yeah, I mean, you can learn how to do long division or dissect a frog or something like that by the time you leave school, but you know nothing about budgeting, nothing about responsible lending or banking, credit cards, car loans, personal loans, nothing about investing. So kids get out and they've got superannuation. Well, what is this? What do I do with it? And what is compound interest? They also don't know about planning for a goal, like how to buy your first car, how to get into your first home and what you got to do to get that deposit together and what it means and lender's mortgage insurance. And then things like retirement, nobody ever talks about the fact that you've got to get to retirement and fund it. So I think there's just really basic key stuff that, when your kids come out and get their first job, well, they should know about superannuation. What is it? They should know about how to use a bank and what credit cards are and what contracts are. I get a mobile phone contract. I get a car. Like, what does this cost? What are the opportunity costs? There's so many things that should be absolutely known by the time they leave school, and it's really frustrating. The other thing, Tim, that really, I suppose you'd say I'm aware of is, and this is not talking about teachers, I just think it's the school system or the education system as a whole, is teaching our kids more to know things, like teach them what to think rather than how to think. And so I want to be able to pass on to my nieces and nephews and Sophie is how to think about things. So don't just take what I say as right and don't take what everyone else says is right, but actually think through the process, what makes sense. And I think that's another skill that we need to be passing on to our children, because that allows them to roll with the punches when things don't quite go right, and also to suss out, what else could this mean? Is someone trying to rip me off? Should I know some more here and should I educate myself? I think that's extremely important. So don't teach them what to think, teach them how to think.
Yeah, completely agree with that, Ben. And teaching them to be suspicious. And gosh, I sound like this older, jaded lawyer, don't I? Because there's so many sharks out there.
Everyone's ripping everyone off.
Want to take your money. Yeah. Unfortunately, there are a few, but most people are good. The truth is, if you can't smell a rat, then you're really, really at risk of being taken advantage of. And, we've all seen this in our professional lives. People come to you and say, I've invested in a timeshare. How do I get out of this thing? And you say, well, you're a really rational person. You understand that they've just capitalized costs and thrown interest into this. And you're going to get some holidays for the next 20 years. But how did you get suckered into this? And they say, I just found it on the internet and they offered me a free holiday and I went to the Gold Coast. And before I knew it, I'd signed up to a $500,000 liability over the next 20 years. That just proves to me that there are people out there who will try and take advantage of people who don't understand what they're getting themselves into. Yes, you need to understand about contracts. Yes, you need to understand about debt. The old adage that if it seems too good to be true, Ben, it probably is. Educate yourself. And I really like the idea that if you're sitting here thinking, I'm worried because I think I am naive. I think I'm one of those timeshare people. That's okay. Don't get me wrong. Timeshare's fine if you know what you're getting yourself into. But if you sit there and think, I don't have those skills, so I can't pass them on to my kids. One of the points I wanted to make, which is something you and I have both spoken about, Ben, is being on the journey together. So something extremely powerful. It's kind of like playing Monopoly, that the family board game, which everybody likes to play, or I don't even know if young people play that anymore, Ben, but it was a favorite when I was growing up. You learn together. If you don't have the skills, there are plenty of resources out there and you can be on the journey together, both making mistakes, both understanding things, or all, I should say, not both, but all. And you can make it a family activity. And I know we're going to drill down a little bit into what we're doing with our young ones at the moment and what we're doing with that delayed gratification, that type of thing. But a point I really want to make is, if you're worried that you don't have the skills to pass on, then make it a fun journey and learn together.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I've used that many times with clients over the years, has said, if you don't know, learn together.
Yeah,
that's the best way to do it, and go find out. And it's interesting. Kids are really fascinated by this stuff, Tim, some more than others, and some take information in differently. So if you can use something like a game, that's a really good thing, and make it a family ritual. So there's a couple of family rituals we have. One of them is I have something called the Book of Lawsome. And everyone laughs when they hear that. So rather than the Book of Awesome, that's the Book of Law. My last name's Law, for anyone that doesn't know.
I see what you did there, Ben. Yeah, very clever.
I just want to repeat it to make me sound a lot smarter, Tim. And so every 1 or 2 weeks, we get the Book of Lawsome out on a Sunday night, and we write in there all the really cool things that have happened and the lessons we've learnt. And it's become a family ritual. And that's great at the end of the year to then go back and look through it. And some of those I like to interject in is monetary ones, what we've learnt. So Sophie learnt about compound interest, or Sophie learnt about how to save money, or just little things like that, so it comes up, and then have conversations. And I think also the learning process, Tim, is really important to raise discussions about mum and dad don't know everything, and I wish I'd learnt that when I was your age. So we're going to learn together. I think that's the thing is we want to project to our children, or we can fall into the trap of wanting to project to our children that we know everything and that, we're the oracle, but it's cool not to know. And, Scott Pape with the Barefoot Investor, he's done an amazing job in raising financial literacy. The amount of people I'd say here that had read the book and started to implement some of the stuff he did was great. Now, I didn't agree with everything he said, but I think it raised the awareness, and it was a great place for families to start, and things like Monopoly and those things are really good as well. So I agree. But overall, Tim, I think we're going to do a couple of series. So I think that the next one is on talking about what's happening with our kids, and I'd like to focus on under 12-year-olds. But my key takeaway, and I'll get yours in a moment, of this is I think it's our moral obligation to financially educate our kids and about money. I think it's one of the key cornerstones of what we need to give to our children, because it's not what you leave them when you die, the money, it's the lessons and it's the values. And if you can build a good blueprint for them now, I think it's a great gift. That's my thought.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat, Ben. I guess you'd call me a pro educator. Personally, I'm very excited, I suppose, to teach my daughter and my nieces and nephews about financial concepts and make sure that they're not those naive ones going through the world. But I kind of feel like that's my role, particularly as an uncle in that scenario, because I can be the funkle. You know, we can do fun stuff together and that type of thing. But I learned so much from other people in my life who were not my parents. Yeah, some of them were family, some of them were uncles and aunts or older cousins and that type of thing. But some of them were just friends of my parents, you know, who I had things to do with. And they sort of assumed that de facto godparent role and taught me so many lessons along the way. So I kind of feel a moral obligation to pay that forward then. Not that, as we said, we've got all the answers and we know all the things, but I really want to try, because I feel that's what I was put here to do, not to be the oracle financial educator, but to be an influence, and hopefully a positive influence, and to try to help them get those basic concepts, you know, the delayed gratification, which we know is a cornerstone of a happy life or a wealthy life, however you define that. But I really do feel passionately about that. And that's why I'm contributing in this podcast and why I'm actually on the journey myself, Ben, because I know what I know. I learned the way that I learned. I'm not saying that that's exactly the way that I'm going to try and provide some of those lessons to those around me, or what I call that circle of influence, but I'm excited to try anyway.
Well, that's it for today. Stay tuned for our next episode when Tim and I will be sharing the money ideas and philosophies that we're using to teach our nieces and nephews, as well as our daughters who are under the age of 12. If you're enjoying the podcast, we'd love it if you'd share the episode with your family and friends. Like us on the socials, and even a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify will help us out enormously. Thanks for investing your time and being part of the Wealth and Wisdom tribe. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time. The information contained in this podcast is general in nature and for educational purposes only. It's not financial advice and it's not legal advice. You should not act on the information without appropriate specific advice for your particular circumstances. I'm a former financial advisor, but choose not to be licensed and cannot and will not give you specific or personal advice in this podcast.